My wife's family crashed our elopement and turned it into their own celebration. I never thought I'd find myself this torn between the woman I love and the family she adores. I'm not someone who actively seeks conflict, and I pride myself on being easygoing. Emma, my wife, used to tease me all the time about how chill I could be, how I had this knack for letting things slide off my back without letting them irritate me for too long. But as it turns out, there's a limit to everyone's patience, and I discovered mine on what was supposed to be the most romantic day of our lives. Our little elopement that ended up being anything but small or private. It started months before that day, when Emma and I were casually talking about our future. We were engaged, had been for about 6 months, and we were feeling the pressure from so many sides about wedding plans. My own parents, who live a few states over, kept telling me they would support any decision we made. Big wedding, small wedding, or no wedding at all. They raised me to be independent and to follow my instincts. Emma's family, however, had an entirely different perspective. A wedding was meant to be a massive family event, with everyone from second cousins to neighbors from 20 years ago in attendance. For them, that was the norm. Any significant milestone was accompanied by half the family tree, trays upon trays of food, and dancing that lasted until dawn. Emma loves her parents and siblings, but she'd spent most of her teenage and young adult years feeling overshadowed by their demands. Her mom, in particular, was the ringleader of everything big and important, as she liked to say. Emma's father, while quieter, tended to fall in line with anything his wife declared. Emma once told me that any time she tried to voice an opinion, her mother would wave it aside with a dismissive, "Don't worry about details, dear. Just let us handle it," which drove Emma insane. That was precisely why Emma came to me one afternoon, about 3 months before our planned wedding date, saying she didn't think she could handle a giant event. She feared she might lose her mind trying to please her mother, sisters, cousins, and everyone in between. I felt the same way, not about losing my mind, I'm fairly patient, but about wanting our union to be an intimate moment that focused on the two of us rather than catering to distant relatives. I'd watched one too many of my friends buckle under the weight of the big wedding. They'd agonize over seating charts, color schemes, the correct ratio of guests to the size of the dance floor, the band's set list, whether Aunt So-and-so would be offended by the salad choices. It just seemed like an absurd escalation of an event that's really about commitment. I wanted to stand with Emma, exchange vows, and just breathe it all in without performing. So we came up with the idea to elope, not to Vegas. Neither of us is the impulsive, run away to a chapel kind of person, but to a quaint old town by the coast, a few hours away from where we live. We knew a local officiant there who could handle the paperwork with minimal fuss. It was picturesque, with a small chapel that was more like a stone cottage overlooking the water, and we planned to say our vows in private, maybe with 1 or 2 close friends to act as witnesses, and then have a nice meal. We'd stay a couple of nights, enjoy our private mini honeymoon, and then return. Simple, or so we thought. We told no one at first. Emma, though absolutely sure this was what she wanted, still worried about her family's reaction. I tried to reassure her, reminding her that this was our life, not theirs, and that we had a right to do what we wanted. For a few weeks, we managed to keep our little scheme under wraps. Emma's mom, of course, sensed something was off as soon as she noticed Emma wasn't fussing over venue catalogs or calling the half-dozen wedding planners who'd left voicemails. She would drop hints like, "Have you decided how many tiers your cake will have?" Or, "Did you think about where we'll seat your father's cousins?" Emma would just nod and say something non-committal like, "Still figuring it out," which clearly made her mom suspicious. One evening, Emma's younger sister, Nicole, visited us at our apartment. She is a sweet person, but sometimes blurts out whatever is on her mind. I guess she saw some confirmations in Emma's email about the date and the chapel reservation because later that same week, Emma's mom called out of the blue, voice trembling with equal parts excitement and accusation, asking if we were heading out of town to do something wedding-related without letting the family know. Emma tried to do damage control, telling her mom we were just exploring options, but at that point, the cat was out of the bag. Her mom insisted we meet for dinner to talk about it like adults. That dinner was tense, to say the least. Emma, her mom, her dad, and I sat around an oversized table in a restaurant that, ironically, specialized in hosting large parties. Her mom was obviously upset, her brow furrowed, her eyes flicking between Emma and me as if we'd committed a crime. Emma squeezed my hand under the table, and I tried to stay calm. Her mother launched into a speech about how the wedding was not just about the two of us, that it was a celebration for the entire family, and that doing it alone would deny everyone the chance to share our happiness. Emma tried to explain that we truly believed the ceremony should be about our bond, and that we wanted it small and private. Her father mostly echoed his wife's sentiments, giving me a half-apologetic look like he was stuck too. After an awkward hour of back and forth, we left with no real resolution. It was clear that Emma's family wouldn't simply let us do our own thing. However, Emma and I decided that we would stand firm. We set a date for mid-spring, about 2 months away, and we refused to share the exact address of the chapel with her family. Our plan was to quietly slip away. I felt bad for Emma, who was besieged by phone calls from her mother every other day, alternating between guilt trips and tears. Emma tried to reassure her mom that we loved everyone, that it wasn't personal, but her mom insisted we were depriving her of a mother-of-the-bride moment. I have to give Emma credit. She remained steadfast, though I could see how the tension wore on her. About a week before the big day, we started packing our bags in secret. We told only 2 of our closest friends, one of whom was going to be our official witness. We triple-checked that no details about the location slipped anywhere her family might find them. We felt simultaneously excited and paranoid, like we were planning a covert mission. Emma admitted that a part of her regretted making it so secretive, but she saw no other option if we wanted to preserve that intimate, unpressured moment. The morning of our departure, Emma and I woke up before dawn. I loaded our suitcases into the trunk, took a last tense look around our apartment to be sure we hadn't left any clue behind. Emma's phone was buzzing with texts from her mother, but she ignored them. The drive took about 3 hours, and by the time we arrived, the sun was rising over the small town's coastline. It was breathtaking. The waves rolled gently onto the rocky shore, and the morning light made everything glow. Emma squeezed my hand in excitement, looking more peaceful than I'd seen her in weeks. We checked into a cozy bed and breakfast, owned by a retired couple who offered to help with anything we needed. The ceremony was scheduled for the following morning. That first day, we walked around the quaint streets, took pictures, grabbed coffee, and enjoyed the surreal feeling of being so close to making our union official in a way that felt right for us. Emma was practically floating. She asked me if I had any regrets, any second thoughts about not involving more people. I told her sincerely, no regrets. This is perfect. She beamed at me, relieved. That evening, as we sat in our room reviewing the final details, Emma's phone buzzed with a call from her mom. Emma hesitated, then answered, hoping it would just be a quick check-in. But the call was strange. Her mom's tone was almost too calm. She said something like, I hope you have a lovely day tomorrow, honey. I just want you to remember we love you. Emma hung up and turned to me, looking suspicious. Neither of us could pinpoint what was wrong with that call, but something was definitely off. Emma said, that was weirdly nice? Too nice. My mom's not the type to give in so easily. The next morning was our wedding day. I can't fully describe the flutter I felt in my stomach. Happy nerves. A slight tremor of excitement. Emma wore a simple white dress that flowed around her ankles with a subtle floral pattern. I had a linen suit I'd picked out specifically for this coastal vibe. We arranged for a local taxi to drive us to the chapel, which was a small, historic stone building perched near a cliff that overlooked the ocean. It was everything we'd wanted. Private, pretty, and calm. Our officiant arrived on time, as did our close friend who was standing as the witness. We were set. Emma and I were in front of that chapel, taking in the view, when I heard a car rumble up the narrow lane behind us. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's a scenic spot, so maybe some tourists were just stopping by. Then I heard more than one car. Emma and I turned to see 3 cars pulling up in a tight caravan. Out stepped her mother, her father, her older brother, her sister Nicole, and at least 4 or 5 other relatives I recognized from a family reunion we'd had once. All of them spilled out onto the gravel, and even from a distance I could see Emma's mother holding a bouquet of flowers, wearing what looked suspiciously like an extravagant mother-of-the-bride gown. I was too stunned to speak. My heart sank and I felt Emma's hand go cold in mine. She squeezed my fingers so hard that it almost hurt. Her mother marched straight up to us, voice chirping with forced brightness. Surprise! We couldn't let you 2 do this alone. This is a family day. Her father ambled behind, a sheepish grin plastered on his face as if to say, I know you're upset, but I'm going along with it anyway. A swirl of emotions knotted in my chest. Rage that they'd intruded on our once-in-a-lifetime moment. Guilt that Emma was obviously torn. And a bizarre sadness that our carefully laid plans were coming undone in front of our eyes. Emma didn't say anything at first. She was paralyzed, eyes darting between me and her mother, who was busy thrusting bouquets into her sister's hands, checking the arrangement of chairs that were set up outside the chapel, and murmuring about how she had thought ahead and brought a few decorations. Then I noticed the 2 men in the last car, a photographer and a videographer apparently. Emma's brother beckoned them to start setting up their gear. This was quickly turning into the very extravaganza we'd run away from. I pulled Emma aside, trying to keep my voice low. Do you want me to put a stop to this? I'll do it, but it might get messy, I said. Emma looked stricken, on the verge of tears. She whispered, I don't know. I can't believe they're here. But how do we turn them away now? I could see she was rattled. Part of me wanted to shield her from this ambush by telling everyone to leave. This was our moment, after all. But I also knew Emma's heart. She'd never be able to forgive herself for publicly shaming her family and sending them back home. By now, her mother had taken charge of the entire scene, instructing the photographer where to stand for the best first look, telling Nicole to fix Emma's hair, and rummaging through a bag full of random decorations. All the while, I stood there with clenched fists, my jaw tightening each time I heard a well-meaning but invasive command. The officiant looked at me with questioning eyes, unsure what was happening. Our friend, who was supposed to be our lone witness, gave me a bewildered shrug. The quiet, intimate ceremony we'd planned was basically overrun. Emma and I exchanged a glance that conveyed our mutual exasperation. But in the end, we both decided to carry on. We loved each other, and we were determined not to let her family's intrusion ruin the core reason we were there, to commit ourselves to one another. The official ceremony itself was rushed and awkward. Emma's mom insisted that the officiant incorporate these elaborate, traditional blessings that Emma and I had never heard of, let alone approved. At one point, I could barely focus on the vows because in my peripheral vision I saw Emma's aunt adjusting some floral arrangement and whispering loudly to Nicole about how the lighting is better if we move to the left. When the officiant finally pronounced us husband and wife, Emma and I kissed, and for one glorious moment it felt like it was just the two of us. But that moment was shattered by a burst of cheers and applause from at least a dozen relatives who were standing there snapping pictures. Emma let out a tiny, choked laugh that I knew masked the heartbreak she felt. This was not what she'd imagined. I forced a smile too, but underneath I wanted to scream. Right after the ceremony, her mother clapped her hands and announced, "On to the celebration. We found a little restaurant in town that can accommodate all of us, and we made reservations. Let's go!" I pulled Emma aside again, voice trembling slightly with anger. "Are you okay with this? Because if not, I'll put my foot down right now." Her eyes were teary, but she shook her head. "No, if we make a scene, it'll be a disaster. Let's just go. We're married now, that's what matters." My heart broke for her. I nodded and tried to comfort her as best I could, though I was seething inside. So off we went in this surreal caravan to a local restaurant that Emma's family had apparently already booked for a makeshift reception. The owners, who recognized us from our brief visit the day before, looked confused to see such a large group following behind us. Her mother started barking orders about pushing tables together, setting up a little area for dancing, and placing the giant wedding cake she'd actually brought along in a cooler. Suddenly, there was music blasting from a portable speaker, and I found myself shaking hands with relatives I barely knew, accepting congratulations in a restaurant that had never been meant to host such an event. Emma tried her best to go through the motions, hugging her siblings, thanking her parents, cutting the cake, and smiling for photos. But I could sense how stiff her smile was. About an hour into this forced celebration, her mother decided it was time for speeches, tapping a fork against a glass. She made a showy, emotional toast about how, when Emma was a little girl, we always dreamed of her special day, and though she tried to slip away from us, we're so happy we could be here. Emma's face reddened, and I had to gently place a hand on her back to steady her. Then her father chimed in, talking about how family is everything, and that while we might not agree on the details, they were grateful to share the moment. I suppose that's when my anger and frustration finally peaked. Because as I listened to them, I realized that while they meant well in their own dramatic, overbearing way, they were completely oblivious to how they'd broken the trust Emma and I had tried to establish. They had imposed themselves on a day that wasn't theirs to shape, turning it from something intimate and special into a spectacle for their benefit. The speech ended with the family raising glasses and toasting, but my mind was racing with jumbled thoughts. I excused myself for a moment to breathe. Emma followed me outside, out onto the restaurant's small patio. She was trembling, tears threatening to spill. She whispered, "I can't believe they did this. I feel robbed. We'll never get that private moment back." I hugged her, murmuring words of reassurance. I didn't know what to say that could erase what had happened. Yes, we were married now, and that was the best part. But the memory we'd hoped to cherish had been invaded. We stood there like that for a few minutes, Emma leaning her head against my chest, and I rubbed her shoulders gently. Suddenly, her mother appeared in the doorway. She called out, "Emmy, come on inside. We have to take the group photo. Everyone's waiting." Her voice was cheerful, as though she was hosting a birthday party for a toddler. Emma looked at me with pained eyes, and I felt a surge of protective fury. We stepped back inside, and I must have worn my anger plainly on my face because Emma's dad approached me quietly and said, "Look, I know this isn't what you two planned, But your mother-in-law just couldn't bear the idea of missing her daughter's wedding. It's a mother's right, you know? I couldn't hold back anymore. In a low, controlled tone, I said, "We specifically asked for a private ceremony. This was our choice and you trampled on it. Can you at least acknowledge that?" The poor man looked stricken, like he'd never thought of it that way. "We just wanted to be part of the celebration," he mumbled. Before we could continue, more family members corralled us into a corner, insisting on different group shots. I obliged with forced politeness, standing shoulder to shoulder with people I hadn't invited, smelling overstrong perfumes, feeling cameras flash in my face. The restaurant staff, I must say, handled the situation graciously. They never expected a crowd of close to 20 people descending on them, but they did their best to keep everyone fed and content. After the photos, we cut that big cake Emma's mom had brought, which was ironically exactly the kind of monstrous multi-tiered wedding cake Emma and I had tried to avoid. Emma dutifully tasted a piece, and I found myself going through the motions, all while feeling like this was someone else's wedding. Toward the end of the reception, Emma's brother Ryan seemed to sense the tension in the air. He approached me quietly and said, "Hey man, I know this wasn't the plan. I'm sorry. You know how mom is. Once she sets her mind to something, there's no stopping her." I sighed, because I did know how she was, but I also felt that Emma's family had taken something precious from us. Ryan patted my shoulder and added, "At least you two are married now. That's the most important thing, right?" I nodded. I suppose it was. Finally, after what felt like hours, the celebration wound down. People hugged Emma, congratulated me, took some leftover cake in plastic containers, and made plans to meet up the next day. Her mother was grinning from ear to ear, telling people it had been a fantastic event. Emma and I managed to slip out as the last of them were packing up their cars. We walked the short distance back to the bed and breakfast, physically and emotionally drained. The sun had started to set, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, a bittersweet reminder of how beautiful the day could have been. In our room, Emma sank onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. She whispered, "That was supposed to be our day. Now I feel like it was theirs." I knelt beside her, pulling her into my arms. I told her that while we couldn't erase what happened, we should try to find solace in the fact that we were, at last, husband and wife. "We'll always have each other," I said. "No matter how they intrude, no matter how they force themselves into our lives. At the end of the day, it's you and me." That made her smile through her tears. We spent the next day avoiding her family as best we could. They called and texted, offering to take us out to brunch, to go sightseeing, to hang out by the shore. We politely declined, saying we needed some time as newlyweds. Her mother left a voicemail that almost made me laugh for how clueless it was. "I don't want you two to be lonely on your honeymoon. Let us come keep you company." Emma just stared at the phone in disbelief. "Lonely? We came here to be alone together," she said. We ended up ignoring most of the messages and took a long walk along the coast, trying to reclaim a fragment of the intimacy we'd lost. When we returned home a couple of days later, the phone started ringing again, this time with extended relatives calling to congratulate us. Apparently under the impression that we'd invited them all along, word had spread that the wedding was so unique and breathtaking by the sea. Emma's mom had posted photos on social media, proclaiming how proud she was to see her daughter wed in such a picturesque place, making it sound like it had been a unanimous plan all along. Emma was livid at first, but then just gave up, realizing that you can't rewrite the day after the fact. She saw the pictures of us cutting the cake, of the vow exchange, photographed from behind a bush, I'm pretty sure, of the forced group shots, and she said, "It looks so fun, so planned. No one would ever know we didn't want it that way." My parents, on the other hand, were sympathetic when they found out what happened. They had stayed out of the loop on purpose, not wanting to interfere. When we told them the story, my mother shook her head and said she was so sorry we didn't get the day we wanted. My dad offered some gentle advice, suggesting that perhaps we could do something small and private just for the two of us later, renew our vows on our anniversary without telling anyone. Emma's eyes lit up at that idea. So maybe one day we'll do exactly that. In the weeks that followed, Emma's mom tried to act as if everything was perfectly fine, peppering us with suggestions about what kind of house we should buy, whether we should have kids soon, and so on. I watched Emma put up firmer boundaries each time. She began telling her mom, "We'll discuss it and get back to you," or "That's a personal decision, Mom," which was a big step for her. Meanwhile, I kept a respectful distance from Emma's family, only engaging when necessary. I didn't want to start a war, but I also needed them to understand that we wouldn't roll over for them in the future. One day, Emma and I sat in our living room, looking over the few photos our friend had managed to take before her family arrived. They were simple shots. Me adjusting Emma's veil, the two of us holding hands and smiling at each other, the officiant preparing his notes. They were raw, unpolished, and beautiful in their simplicity. We both got a little choked up looking at them because they reminded us of what might have been if we'd been given the space to have our private ceremony. Yet those pictures also reminded me how strong Emma was in standing up to her family's expectations, how deeply we cared for each other despite the drama, and how ultimately we were able to say "I do" under a blue sky by the sea. If there's one thing I've learned from this whole experience, it's that weddings bring out people's true colors, sometimes the best and sometimes the worst. In our case, it exposed just how desperately Emma's family clings to tradition, and how they believe any major life event must be shared with the entire clan. Maybe in their eyes, they were doing the right thing, ensuring they didn't miss out on a moment of celebration. But in doing so, they trampled on the concept of boundaries and personal choice. It's something Emma and I will have to navigate for the rest of our married life, balancing our love for them with our need for autonomy. And so that's the story of how our elopement became a family reunion. There are moments I still feel frustrated thinking about it. Moments Emma lets out a sigh and says something like, "We should have gone to a completely different country instead." But there are also moments I hold Emma's hand and remind her that, at the end of the day, she's my wife and I'm her husband. No amount of meddling can change that. I think we've come out stronger for having faced this clash so early in our marriage. If anything, it's taught us how to communicate our boundaries more clearly and how to lean on each other when the rest of the world, or at least her mother's corner of it, demands too much. We plan to create our own memories moving forward. Maybe next year, on our anniversary, we'll slip away for a small vow renewal. No announcements, no pictures posted online, nothing but the two of us. Because that's all we ever wanted. The freedom to celebrate our love in our own way, without an audience, without expectations, and without the chaos that others seem to think is necessary for a wedding. As frustrating as the experience was, at least we have each other. And that's more meaningful than any big party could ever be. Emma sometimes jokes that the next time her family tries to hijack something special, we'll be smarter and plan it on the moon or something equally unreachable. But wherever we end up, I know we'll be side by side, determined to protect that sacred space where only we, and no one else, get to decide how our love is celebrated.